Scattered across this nation, there are places abandoned, boarded up, mysterious. I will unlock their doors and make them yield their secrets. From a people's palace of dreams that brought glamour and hope, to a vast Victorian citadel of heroes. The size of it.
You've got the authorities, you've got the mob. Where's the fire brigade?
In the middle. They've always been in the middle.
To a vast Soviet war machine that brought us to the brink of World War III. Submarine warfare is hide and seek.
I've realized today how chillingly close we were to annihilation.
To the beginning of the great British seaside resort. It's all eerily silent now. How extensive is the sewer system here in Brighton?
About 44 miles.
This will be my hidden history of Britain. In this program, I'm shining a light on an abandoned military hospital that changed the face of Britons. At a time of conflict.
Oh, that is horrendous.
It was the birthplace of a groundbreaking innovation.
He's going to have to walk that bit of flesh up to the patient's face.
Indeed.
I had no idea any of this stuff happened.
By an ambitious surgeon who left a revolutionary legacy.
That is my father after the change of sex separation.
Goodness.
She became a woman.
Extraordinary.
I'm wading through snow and wearing a Russian hat. But don't be fooled, this is Aldershot in Hampshire, and this is the British Army garrison. Here, the military hospital for which a utilitarian building would have done. But this one has beautifully rounded arches, a palladium balustrade, pilasters, a pediment, a tower, a dome, a clock tower, and a weather vane, because only that would do for the British Army. And I love it. Built on a hilltop in 1879, like a colossus, this building dominates the countryside. The Cambridge Military Hospital is a mission statement in brick, a monument to the importance of the military and its soldiers, in health and in sickness. But this imposing building also has a hidden history. It was the birthplace of reconstructive surgery, the medical revolution that has given us the power to remodel how others see us and consequently how we see ourselves. Our faces are our identity. Each day we see ourselves in the mirror and we look for that reassuring symmetry. We smile, we frown, we wink. But what happens if we lose our familiar face to catastrophic damage? With a face changed beyond recognition, who are we? This is a hospital that led the world in repairing the disfigurements of soldiers damaged by war. It's been abandoned for the past 22 years and is about to be redeveloped.
Ceilings have gone completely. Just black plastic now.
But before it changes forever, I've been granted permission to have one last look.
If you leave it alone for 20 years, it's going to fall apart.
What happened within these walls to make it the cradle of plastic surgery? That's what I'm here to find out.
So the first thing that strikes you coming into the building is this corridor of almost dismaying length. I wouldn't like to say how long it is. I mean, it looks like kind of a quarter of a mile or something. And built very wide, you can imagine trolleys with wounded or sick soldiers zooming backwards and forwards along this corridor. Poor old building has been empty for a long time, and everything has come down. Paintwork, plasterwork, ceilings.
Despite the state of disrepair of the building, the elegance, beauty, and purpose are built into its fabric.
Lovely ironwork. Stonework has been rounded as well. Very, very fine.
The first step of my journey is to discover why this ornate military building was commissioned.
It was a war, really, that changed the way that our armies fought and our armies survived.
Captain Pete Starling was an officer in the Royal Army Medical Corps with combat experience. He's an expert on the history of this hospital and the Crimean War of 1853-6.
Had the Crimean War in itself been different from other wars?
It was starting to get more industrialised. The warships were steam-powered. We had railways to carry supplies up forward. And we had trench warfare as we dug our trenches. We had photographers, we had war correspondents. They were able to get their stories back and eventually their photographs back. So it really changed warfare completely.
So in this war, we've got mechanised ways of killing people, but we've also got publicity from the war coming back to the home front.
Well, I suppose we could say that was the problem. In wars before, the families at home didn't hear about it. But now, with people like the Times newspaper reporters there, sending his story back by the telegraph, yes, the families heard about it quickly. The public heard about it. And this was what caused this public outcry about the medicine in the Crimea and nobody to look after the sick and wounded in these terrible hospitals at Scutari.
Now, what was the role of Florence Nightingale in the Crimean War?
Well, after the public outcry, Florence wanted to try and bring some sort of order into these terrible hospitals, so she came out in November 1854.
Florence Nightingale found defective sewers, overcrowding, and lack of medicines. And she too was soon funneling her outrage through the pages of the Times.
Florence Nightingale's observations on what had happened in Crimea were influential afterwards.
They were. She'd got a lot of friends on high in the Army Medical Department, and of course in the government. So they were very influential. They had a big royal commission afterwards when they decided they needed proper military hospitals.
And the design of this hospital, to what does it owe its existence?
Well, it's really built on what they called the Nightingale plan, this big, long central corridor and big wards, plenty of space for the beds. So here we see an example of one of those big high-ceiling wards, big windows, plenty of light, plenty of fresh air.
Nightingale transformed the practice of nursing and military medicine. This building embodies her bold new ideas.
The ward's so dilapidated, they've had to board it up.
Much of the evidence is now hidden amongst the ruins. I've got hold of the blueprint of this hospital to see how far the new ideas about nursing were built into its design.
So what we have here is an architect's drawing, drawing number 3, so it would date all the way back to the 1870s. And what you see very clearly is this enormously long central spine corridor here, 528 feet long, and the wards branching off it, 92 feet long, but along the side, in each case, 6 windows, allowing beautiful light into each of the wards. At the end of the wards, the baths and the laundries and the WCs, so all very, very close at hand, the scullery, and these facilities are repeated in each of the wards. So all really carefully planned and state-of-the-art.
In their day, these now run-down corridors and wards were modern, cutting edge, and they were built because of the First Modern War. Crimea was fought in public as well as on the battlefield, and it would change forever the way that wars are won and lost.
Number 10, 11, 12.
Today, this abandoned, crumbling building is a forgotten monument to that conflict. But it was what came next that gave it its first terrible test, the Great War. How would it cope with the thousands upon thousands of maimed and wounded coming back from the front, and what to do with the broken faces.
Wow, that is a catastrophic injury. That is horrendous.
I'm here at the abandoned military hospital in Aldershot on a quest to uncover its hidden history.
Women's service wards.
It was the Crimean War that built this hospital, but it would be the First World War that would test it. The world had seen nothing like it. 20 million soldiers were wounded as mass weaponry exerted a devastating toll. The scale of the war could deaden us to its terrible impact on people. I've come to a farm somewhere in Hampshire to find out something about the weaponry that was being deployed during the Great War and the injuries that it could inflict. I've asked armourers Ben and Alistair to set up a target. It will bring home to me the grim reality of the violence of war.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Ben.
Hi, Ben.
Hi, Alistair.
Alistair.
So we've set up a small range for you here today so you can have a look at some World War I Lee Enfield rifles.
Obviously quite a heavy weapon.
The Lee Enfield rifle was used by the British, and nearly 3.5 million were manufactured during the First World War. What kind of damage could they do?
May I see the ammunition that was used?
So this is the 303 round.
Yes. So this is the projectile.
That's the projectile itself, then everything behind it is the charge, which forces it down the barrel.
Now, what does that actually do when it enters a human being?
It'll puncture a hole all the way through. As it passes through, all the flesh starts to spread and then slaps back together. And so you get actually wounds and injuries up to about 20 times the width of the bullet itself in the surrounding flesh. So it can break bones, kill off nerves.
How appalling.
OK, if you'd like to take a seat behind the rifle.
It's estimated that 50 billion bullets were fired during the First World War.
Lift up the bolt and pull it back.
So what might the impact be from just one?
Close it off. OK.
Okay.
A pig's skin and muscle are similar to ours. This animal from an abattoir will give us an idea of the impact of these bullets on human flesh.
Firing.
Good. OK, unload. Lay that down.
Ah,
How was that?
good. Did I hit anything?
Probably yes. OK.
I might not be much of a threat with a rifle, but a First World War sniper could mutilate and kill at a distance of 400 meters.
Firing.
Well, there's no doubt at all that the pig was hit.
That's right. Yeah, you can see the entry wounds here. Small, dark scorch marks and holes here, approximately the width of the bullet as it entered the target.
It's quite a neat entry wound, isn't it?
That's right. And if you look around the other side,
Oh my!
that's right, and you can see the effect that it has as it comes through.
That is horrendous.
Now, in this circumstance, it's obviously it's really quite devastating.
That is absolutely appalling. Look at that. This is a catastrophic injury, the exit wound. And you just have to try and imagine that on a human face. During the Great War, millions of bullets like this flew through the air, and millions of men died from that and from shrapnel and from fire. But extraordinarily, a few survived.
The wounded from the battlefields were picked up by stretcher bearers from no man's land and carried through the mud to the dressing stations. They would then be sorted and prioritized for treatment. I'm meeting Pete Starling again to find out what happened to the injured.
And if you can imagine now that I'm taking you into a ruined French building where we've got our dressing station, and we can talk about this sorting, this triage, which means to sort, and how we would prioritise our casualties.
Pete shows me a reconstruction to reveal some of the choices that had to be made. OK, let's start with this man.
Well, here, he's got a head wound, but he obviously doesn't look too good. And if it's a penetrating wound of his skull, his chances of survival are not that great. So we don't want to really waste too much time on him.
We're going to write him off.
We're going to write him off.
So it's a very ruthless process.
It is ruthless, but it's there for a purpose.
Those who are judged too badly injured will be put aside and left to die.
You couldn't waste time just treating one case that you knew the chances of survival is very slim when you could treat 3 or 4 or 5 other more slightly wounded cases.
And then how would you make a decision to ship people back to Britain?
If you couldn't really treat them definitively and within 2 weeks and get them back up to the front line, then you need to evacuate them back to England in a hospital ship with their blighty wound.
This man does not look in a good way.
He doesn't.
We better send this chap away. So a blighty wound is something you want to have in the sense you're going home, but of course a blighty wound means you've been seriously injured.
That's correct, yes.
The Cambridge Military Hospital came into its own at this moment. Loaded onto the hospital ships, many of the wounded were transported here. But the very success of modern frontline medicine had created a new problem. The soldiers were surviving, but surviving unrecognizably. As the men came back from the front mutilated and disfigured, who would rise to the challenge of making their faces and their lives whole again?
Harold Gillies started from nothing and developed techniques for rebuilding the face that had never been done before. He's really the father of plastic surgery.
Andrew Bamji was working as a consultant when he started delving into hospital records. They revealed the remarkable story of Harold Gillies.
This is a picture of Gillies in his army uniform, late 1915, probably round about the time that he first came to Aldershot. It doesn't look particularly prepossessing, but he is only 33. He is sent out to France to be a general surgeon. He realised then that there were going to be lots and lots of facial casualties. The pattern of the war meant that there were going to be people with facial injuries and they were going to survive them.
In those days, what can be done for a patient with a damaged face?
In the early days during the war, patients were made face masks basically because they didn't have surgical techniques that worked properly. We have got a surprise for you. Mm-hmm. We've got a face mask.
Let's have a look at that.
What you can see here is a missing cheek attached to a little bridge over the nose and a pair of spectacles.
Yes. So this patient probably had not lost the eye.
No.
But had lost the cheek.
But had lost the cheek.
The left cheek.
And what you can see inside is the contour is quite different from the outside.
Yes.
It's a very, very thin plate and painted quite nicely to match with a slight variation of colour under the eye, which would fit with a crease under the eye, as most people have.
And obviously suited to the complexion of that particular patient.
Exactly.
Mm. Now that's a magnificent piece of work.
It is a lovely thing. And in this case, the patient's lost his eye and has had a pair of glasses made with a face mask that contains the glass eye and the eyelids nicely made up, probably silver wire for the eyelashes.
Well, I'm astonished because, I mean, really, unless you looked at that person for a very long period and very hard, you would not know that there was a defect to that face at all.
No.
Now, this couldn't make up for problems like eating and drooling and things like that.
No, it wouldn't. And some of the pictures you can see have got a very good appearance from the mask, but from a functional point of view, absolutely useless. Gillies moved away from trying to cover up a hole. He said structure is not the only thing that's important, function is also important. The problem with masks, as Harold Gillies found, was that patients didn't like them because they were cold, they were unemotional, they were actually extremely uncomfortable very often.
It was in this now derelict building that Gillies set up a unit dedicated to repairing the shattered faces returning from the front. These faded corridors are our last link to that historic moment. I can scarcely imagine the human suffering that once streamed through them. Gillies wrote, "Men without half their faces, men burned and maimed to the condition of animals, day after day made their way towards us."
The sort of injuries that Gillies ended up dealing with, where there were large amounts of tissue missing, your whole nose, half your jaw, part of the skull, those sort of injuries were historically unreconstructable.
Colonel Alan Kay is a military reconstructive surgeon. He spent years repairing the broken bodies of soldiers injured in Afghanistan. What's the challenge in fixing a face? He's going to show me on a dead pig.
Alan, is the pig a useful animal for training or for demonstrating procedures in human reconstructive surgery?
Yes, if you look at its skin compared to most other animals, it is closer to human skin. If you can feel here, it's relatively soft and pliable. I've already created a small wound here, just below the eye.
Yes.
Now you can see with that, to simply sew up that wound, to stitch it together like that, is going to pull down on the eyelid. So you can't simply stitch up a wound like that.
No.
Some of the earlier techniques that were available to use, it was a simple skin graft, which I can demonstrate. If, for example, we take off some of the back of the pig here, just using this knife here. And here we go. So here we have what will be known as a split skin graft. It's not the full thickness of skin. And this can be used then to potentially get that to heal. The trouble with a split skin graft is wounds will always try and make themselves smaller. So over a period of time, that would contract again, and you would cause another deformity, pulling down on the eyelid, for example. And you can imagine if quite a large chunk of your cheek was missing, and you had a split skin graft there, which then shrunk, it would distort the corner of your mouth, pull down on your eyelid, pull your nose across. An alternative to that is to take the full thickness of the skin, because that doesn't contract in the same way. The trouble with that is, as the name implies, it's taking the full thickness of the skin, and that then could be transferred from there into that defect.
Yeah.
And there's several advantages over that. One, it doesn't contract. So in terms of its appearance, it is far superior. The difficulty is, when we've got more complex reconstructions, we need larger volumes of tissue to be brought to the face. Once you get to a larger size of tissue, then I'm afraid it's not going to pick up enough blood supply and it will die.
Right.
Early attempts to transfer larger tissue with enough blood supply met with failure. On his first solo flight on the 14th of July 1916, Lieutenant Henry Ralph Lumley crash-landed his BE-12 and it caught fire. He was 24 years old. His face was burned beyond recognition. Gillies' attempt to replace Lumley's missing face was a disaster. The new tissue went gangrenous and Lumley died. In these now derelict wards, Gillies devoted himself to overcoming the medical problems of reconstructive surgery. But how would he conquer the monumental challenge of keeping flesh alive?
Everything you've told me has astonished me. I had no idea any of this stuff happened.
I'm here at the abandoned military hospital in Aldershot. In 1916, Surgeon Harold Gillies set himself the seemingly impossible task of making war-broken faces whole again. Successfully moving living tissue from one area of the body to the face was the challenge of the day. I'm meeting military surgeon Alan Kay to find out how Gillies did it. So, what did Gillies bring to this party?
Gillies developed what was called the tube pedicle. And I can demonstrate what we're talking about here. We're going to make 2 parallel incisions. Okay, so we'll come down through here. So this is raising a flap of tissue, sometimes from the groin and sometimes from the side of the abdomen.
But what you're doing is you're separating the skin from the tissue underneath.
That's right.
While the skin is still attached at both ends.
We can see the only way that skin is connected is at either end. If we just cut it there now, that bit of it will die.
Yeah.
We now leave it like this to give it a chance to get used to this new blood supply that it's relying on.
How long do you leave it like that?
Probably 2 to 3 weeks.
Really? Okay, so the skin has got used over, let's say, a couple of weeks to this new condition. Yes. What does that enable Gillies to do?
Okay, what tends to happen with human skin, when you've cut it like this, is it naturally curls in on itself. So now we can begin to see this is looking like a tube.
Indeed.
By formally making a tube out of it, by stitching the wound round the back.
Good heavens.
Like that.
Yes.
That makes a nice tube of tissue.
Right.
Okay, hence the name tube pedicle.
So, once the tube is formed, presumably at some point we take it off.
Yes, so now we've got to get this tissue up to here. Now, it's not going to reach straight up to there in a single go. So we've got to go through an intermediary. Okay. And what was commonly used in Gillies' time was the patient's arm. Okay. And I'll demonstrate how that was achieved. We would disconnect at one end. So that this has now got used to, instead of having blood coming from all around, to only having blood going in from one end or the other. And if we disconnect it now at one end, this can then be swung round, and you can go that way, or we'll go this way, I think, and we can connect it to here.
You're kidding me.
No, absolutely not. You want to get blood supply coming in from here, yes, as well as there.
Gillies is going to have to walk that bit of flesh up to the patient's face.
Indeed, and the term that was adopted for that was waltzing. So they would waltz the pedicle.
So I'm lying in bed, and I've got a flap coming out of here.
Absolutely,
stuck
yes,
to my arm.
Yes, yep. And the next step, that we now have this tube here, that can then reach up to here. Now I can unwind all of that tube, and we have all of this tissue available now to rebuild the face.
Everything you've told me has astonished me. I had no idea any of this stuff happened. The idea that you walk, or as you say, waltz skin over a period of weeks from a distant part of the body to a facial injury is completely new to me. It's amazing to think that that extraordinary procedure started here in this very building. I'm curious to know more about the cases that established Gillies' reputation. Who were those men, and what did they have to endure? Andrew Bamji has the old hospital records.
This book gives, if you like, a short snapshot of some of the patients, some successful, some of them not. We have here Vicarage.
Yes.
We know exactly when he was injured, the Battle of Jutland.
And here the skin is being brought from the chest in order to repair the man's nose.
Indeed. What has been done is that this triangular flap has been raised from the chest, and so he is the first British tube pedicle ever done.
How successful was the Vicarage case?
Very successful. Vicarage sadly had burned hands, but you can see from the end result there that he's actually got quite a reasonable appearance.
Yes. Extraordinary. This is a remarkable success. And such a vivid display of how this extraordinary procedure works.
I think this is another feature that Gillies is responsible for, and that is proper record keeping. As a teaching aid, to have a whole sequence of sequential photographs like this is almost unique at this time.
Harold Gillies brought to damaged servicemen both hope and the confidence that he could rebuild their faces. And this is where I think lies his greatness. By meticulously recording his successes and his failures, he handed down to future generations all the benefits of his innovations.
And his innovations and expertise would be needed sooner than most could imagine. In 1939, the world blew up again. The Second World War brought in a new wave of disfigured soldiers and a new set of medical challenges.
I remember thinking, I can live. So many of my friends didn't come out of burning airplanes alive.
95-year-old Doug Vince was only 20 when he was flight engineer on a Sterling bomber. He's one of the very few men alive who remembers what it was like to be treated by Harold Gillies' protege, Archibald McIndoo, who continued Gillies' groundbreaking work on the tube pedicle. Recognizing that broken faces made for broken identities, he created a society, the Guinea Pig Club, for his patients.
What's the tie that you're wearing?
The Guinea Pig Club.
That is the Guinea Pig Club tie.
Yes, if you look, you can see a tiny guinea pig with wings. That's the emblem. Very proud to be a guinea pig, as we all were. Out of 640-something guinea pigs at the end of the war, when we last met, there were 6 of us.
Doug, tell me about how you got injured during the war.
A German fighter came back with us as we flew in the dark at night, and he shot at us and set the plane on fire. And I passed out because of the smoke. And the pilot landed the aircraft in flames. I came round and saw a square of moonlight. And I remember thinking, I can live. And I clambered out of this escape hatch, ran along the wing. I thought it might explode because it was burning quite furiously. And I was still running when I went off the end of the wing.
What injuries did you get?
I was burned hands and face.
What surgery could they do for you?
They grafted my hand. Yes, there's one there.
Yes.
One there.
Yes. So you've got a big graft here.
This hand was burned as well. You can just see across the fingers there.
Yes.
A slight whitening.
Where did that skin come from?
Off my leg and my tummy.
Did you build much of a relationship with McIndoo, the surgeon?
Marvellous relationship, yes. He took my hand and held it and looked at it like it was something very valuable. And he looked and said, I think we can help you. The 3 grafts made it nearly normal.
Tell me about the photographs you brought along today.
This is one of me when I was 16, and I was just old enough to be allowed to ride a motorbike.
You've not changed much.
No. And this is one of my wedding, as you can see.
I can.
My happy day. I'm a lucky lad.
Doug proudly wears the tie of the guinea pigs. And it strikes me that all the advances that have been made in reconstructive surgery have depended not only on the generations of surgeons who succeeded Harold Gillies, but also on the patients who put their trust in them.
It was in this hospital that Harold Gillies started his work to fix broken faces that had been considered beyond repair. What he did next would not only push out the frontiers of medicine, but cross the boundaries of the law.
These operations were done in secret, deadly secret.
I'm here at the birthplace of plastic surgery, the now derelict Cambridge Military Hospital in Aldershot. A face is never just a face. It's who we think we are. When Harold Gillies fixed the faces broken by war, he gave back to the men a sense of themselves. But Gillies' success in repairing the irreparable will be upstaged by what he did next. He imagined the inconceivable.
Oh, it was just mind-blowing, absolutely. My father was the first one to have the operation done in this country. It was so frowned on by society. It wasn't natural, it wasn't right, it wasn't proper.
Diana Cowell discovered that when she was just a child, her father Robert had changed gender from a man to a woman.
What are you carrying?
The extraordinary picture of my father driving a racing car. And as an RAF Spitfire pilot, he was a captain.
This defies all preconceptions and prejudices, doesn't it? Because this man who wanted so much to be a woman was involved in such manly pursuits.
Probably why. I just wanted to prove I'm in a man's body. I must prove that I am a man. That was my understanding of it.
Yes.
And that is my father after the change of sex operation.
Goodness.
She became a woman.
Well, isn't that extraordinary?
But that was after she had an operation with Sir Harold Gillies, who was not allowed to do the sex change operation legally because she was still legally the body of a man.
Harold Gillies is the person who operated on your father.
In 1951, yeah. He actually practiced the night before on a cadaver because he'd never done that operation before. It had never been done in this country before.
The case of your father became enormous national news.
Yeah, that's the picture of her on the front, and that's how she was and how she changed. She was paid about £8,000 for this article, because nowadays money it would be over £200,000.
Do you remember anything of this sensationalism?
My grandmother said, "There's some people outside I don't want you to see." And later on I found out that these were reporters.
But even in the 1950s, you were being doorstepped because this was sensational.
Yes.
Do you think you ever got over the shock?
I don't think I've ever got over the shock. And I'm still very, very emotional about it because I always had this little hurt child in my heart, just, oh, want my daddy, want my daddy.
I'm struck that Robert Cowell, who became Roberta Cowell, was as much a pioneer as the surgeon Harold Gillies. Theirs was a revolutionary path in an unforgiving age. Gillies spent his life pushing out boundaries, first in medicine and now the law. And once he had taken the giant step from remaking faces to remaking genders, Britain and the world would be changed forever.
Before Gillies came along, there was no possibility of changing sex. It was Gillies that made the impossible possible.
Writer Liz Hodgkinson was looking at the story of Roberta Cowell when she uncovered an even more astonishing case hidden by history. 5 years before Robert Cowell had become Roberta Cowell, Gillies had gone further in pushing the frontiers of medicine than anyone thought possible.
In the early 1970s, I got to know Roberta Cowell and we became very friendly. She gave me all the Dillon information. Otherwise, nobody would have ever known about Michael Dillon because it was done in great secrecy.
Liz Hodgkinson discovered that Gillies had also turned a woman, Laura Dillon, into a man called Michael Dillon, creating male genitalia by adapting a technique that he'd pioneered decades earlier.
A woman seeking to become a functioning man, that would have been entirely revolutionary.
It had never been done before. And there was probably only one man at the time in the world, who was Gillies, who would actually be able to do it. And he decided that he would have a go. It was very risky. It was science fiction surgery.
That is
an extraordinary leap from what he was doing with soldiers. How did that come about?
She was very, very unhappy as a woman, as a female. We're talking about the 1930s now, 1930s, 1940s. Through a process of seeing various doctors, was referred to Gillies and was completely desperate by this time, living as a young woman.
Do we know what his initial reaction was to the request?
He always wanted to help what he saw as nature's mistakes. And he was very, very far ahead of his time. So he agreed to take Laura Dillon on, and the operations took years. They took about 10 years, I think.
Really?
Altogether, yeah, altogether.
And as far as we know, it was the first?
It'd never been done before. From start to finish, it was pioneering.
What are the photographs you're holding?
Here is Laura Dillon, as she was then, as a little girl guide.
Yes.
That was taken in sometime in the 1930s.
Yes.
There she was at Oxford then. She was at St Anne's College, Oxford. You can see how sort of awkward she looks as a female.
Well, that's true enough,
Yeah.
yes. Yes, that's true enough.
Here is the first picture taken in 1948 when Laura officially became Michael and had her birth certificate changed from female to male, corrected. It was said the birth certificate was corrected.
Did Michael Dillon regard it as a success?
Well, I think it was either that or committing suicide. That was how serious it was.
Yeah. It's a remarkable proposition to change a woman into a functioning man. I mean, particularly at that time. Was there anything in Gillies' experience that made him think he was equipped to do this?
Harold Gillies developed the two-pedicle technique, and this was what was used to transform the very first biological female into a functioning male.
The tube pedicle started as a life-saving innovation for soldiers maimed in war. But its creation also proved to be the basis of the first female-to-male sex change. These faded rooms are one of the last links to an extraordinary man. Harold Gillies' innovations with the tube pedicle made him a pioneer in his field. That work established his worldwide reputation. But what he did in secret has transformed our society.
The wards in this hospital received the shattered bodies of soldiers who had served their country. Some then encountered ostracism because of their damaged faces, distorted from their original symmetry. Harold Gillies rebuilt them and returned those men to society. Later, men and women who felt deeply that they needed to change their gender turned to Gillies, and once more courageous patients found the brave surgeon that they needed. From this building have come great leaps forward: medical, social, and moral. In the next programme, I'm prizing open the door to a vast Victorian citadel of heroes, the size of it, to reveal the story of the extraordinary people who stand between us and chaos.
I can always remember the screams and the harrowing noises.
Between life and death.
That little girl had been murdered by Myra Hindley.
A breed apart.
I can tell you every death I've been to.
What motivates these men and women to rush into danger when the rest of us are running away?
We tried to calm people down. We knew it was going to be sad.
To step in when our society tears itself apart.
You've got the authorities, you've got the mob. Where's the fire brigade?
In the middle. They've always been in the middle.